a longtime friend of the show. In terms of full disclosure, yes, he is a friend of the show, and yes, he's one of the few people that I actually trust on this issue. Good morning, Ed Martin.
Good morning, McGraw. I'm glad to be with you. Yeah, this is fascinating and important stuff. Actually, it's more complicated than people realize. I think you're seeing that a little bit, but,
right? Which is why we wanted you on here. Okay, hold on a second. So you were, as well as chief of staff for Governor Blunt, you were also in the city. What was your official capacity in the city?
Yeah, I was thinking about this after we talked yesterday. I can say this. I was the first job I had in politics appointed. I was the appointed chairman of the St. Louis City Board of Elections. And so I lived in the city at the time. I was the chairman of the board. And as chairman, there are 4 people who run the City Board of Elections, just like there are 4 who run the county. And so 2 and 2, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. I was obviously a Republican, appointed by Blunt. Later, I was chief of staff to the governor and had to fill slots like the ones that I had taken, 2 and 2 and all that, and that's the governor's appointments. And even later, of course, I was a candidate for office, and I lived on all sides of the election boards, and so I know exactly what the dynamic is, and I can see what's happening, and it's those are the positions I had that I can say give me a lot of sense of this.
All right, so what happened yesterday?
Well, the real, I think you've mentioned this, and the stories have covered it slightly. The real answer here, part of the answer, is that this election took place so close to the primary, to the presidential primary, that is. When I was in the City Board of Elections, we went through the process after the 2000 election, which was a debacle in Florida, but people may not remember it was a debacle in St. Louis. They kept the polls open, all this stuff. So they gave the federal government gave a bunch of money called the Help America Vote Act, and we all went out and bought new equipment, and we got the systems more secure. We cleaned up the rolls. When I was at the Board of Elections, we found that there were dogs registered, still dead people. We found out that people voted on both sides of the river in a presidential election. So all the Help America Vote Act lets you spend money to clean up the rolls and buy new equipment. And at the time, we made the decision, same decision St. Louis County did, to do both a paper ballot with a machine reader as well as a touch screen. And you always had one touch screen in the site, because if you ran out of ballots, it might be a long line, but you could vote on the touch screen, you see. And so what happened, because there was an election just a few weeks ago in the presidential primary, the law requires, and good practice is, that you embargo those electronic machines so you don't erase them in case there's a contested race or something like that. So when I went to vote yesterday in St. Louis County, there was no touch screens. And I remember I said to the guy, why aren't there? And he said, we don't have any because they're all embargoed. You have to wait until a period of time and goes past. So they ran out of ballots, but they also it was a sort of perfect storm. It was the wrong kind of election because there was no backup. Now, having said that, you only have 5 or 6 days a year where you're on show. It's not like a 162-game season. You just have 5 or 6 days. You've got to be better than this. And I think that they're really the egg on their face is an omelet. It's not just a single egg, because it's really embarrassing.
Ed, how come they couldn't combine the presidential primary election and yesterday's election?
Well, I turn that onto the legislature and the governor again. There's the municipal elections are set in statute, and you can't ever, you can't move. You could move them by law, but they tend to be in a rhythm, right? The school boards and all that.
Right.
They could have set the presidential on this day yesterday. They didn't, because they wanted to be forward, to be more in play. To be not just Wisconsin, but to be more up front, closer to Iowa. So it's a political preference. But if you're very cynical, you look up and say, well, Jay Nixon and the legislature, Republican, Democrat governor and Republican legislature, you guys just spent, $7 or $8 or $9 million to have an election 4 weeks ago when you could have done it now. But that's a political preference, and that's what they decide.
Okay, so it's because people tried to tell me that you couldn't legally do it. They very easily could have decided to have the presidential election yesterday, but they chose to have it 3 weeks ago.
Of course, there's nothing in the Republican. I know the Republican rules better. The Republican presidential primary. I sat on the RNC for 2 years. There's no having. Wisconsin did it yesterday. Wisconsin had their primary. We could have easily had our primary on April 5th, and it would have been nothing wrong with it. Now, there's a political preference. You want to be up front, and you think it's more important, but there's nothing legal, and it's a waste of money then, right? So and imagine, by the way, if all those people that voted in the presidential primary, we had turnout that was pretty big for, if they were all there, they'd vote on these important issues that we care about. I mean, these April elections can be anemic turnout, and you say, well, somebody just approved a tax increase, and it was only 10%, 12% of the voters. So, it's probably a dumb move.
Ed Martin, can you hold on through the break? I got more questions for you.
You bet. Yeah, happy to.
Ed Martin here with us, telling us and trying to explain and read the tea leaves what actually happened last night and the ramifications, the backstory that you're not hearing. A man from the inside. Ed Martin, hang tight. 921 here, Big 550 KTRS. John Beal Roofing.